This is the second part of the lecture on the sociology of religious trend in American culture called privatization. It occurs to me looking at my face in this screen that what my parents used to tell me is that I have a face for radio and a voice for print. It's actually hard to look at yourself on tape. Anyhow, the idea here in the second trend is that as we observe American culture, we are finding that people are more and more privatized. Now, if any of you are business students, this has a business application. So privatization is when, it has to do with owning private property from a collective culture to a kind of a capitalistic culture. This is not that application. So pay close attention, because in the midterm, I always get people answering it the wrong way when they look it up on the internet. Privatization. What we mean by privatization is the movement away from institutional identification. So sociologist named Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone, in which he described a trend, used as a metaphor here, that more people than ever were bowling, fewer people than ever were bowling in teams in American culture. And he used this as a metaphor to describe a trend where in almost every avenue of life, you and I are beginning to identify less and less with institution and more simply as individuals. We are increasingly disconnected from friends, family, neighbors, companies, and democratic structures. We increasingly are refusing to commit ourselves to identification with institutions. You can find this in political identification. So the fastest trend is not to relate to Republican or Democrat, but to be an independent or refuse to state. Some of you grew up in small towns, and there were things called Elks Club and Moose Lodges and Rotary Clubs. These used to be central organizations for doing real good. They'd have these campaigns to help out the community, and men wanted to be involved with this, and women wanted to be in these fraternal organizations. Well, these organizations are largely dying. People don't want to identify necessarily with those organizations. We find it in union membership. We find it in denominational affiliation. Some of you go to churches that you don't even know what the denomination is. Churches used to be known as the First Baptist Church of Roseville. Why did they name it that? Why not some clever name? Well, if you were the First Baptist Church, you were the First Baptist, you'd plant that church. And anybody that moved to the area that was a Baptist, the first place they would look would be, well, I'm going to go to a Baptist church. Well, there's First Baptist. And if there's enough people, there's a Second Baptist and a Third Baptist, right? Well, people don't move to an area and think, where's the Baptist church? If they want to go to church, where's the growing church? Where's the exciting church? Where's the best speaker? We don't think denominationally anymore. We're in a post-denominational culture. You can see this even within faith systems as well. Each year, the percentage of people who identify with faith systems go down, like I am a, but the percentage of people who call themselves spiritual goes up. So the numbers kind of fluctuate that way. As in, I kind of relate to God my own way. I don't need religion to tell me how to relate to God. This is a privatization trend. Now, what contributes to privatization? Well, there are things that broke our faith in institutions in American culture. There are a lot of complex factors, but if you think about what broke our faith in government, well, Watergate was a key moment, a watershed moment in our culture, where for the first time, the curtain was pulled and we saw this president as this really weak individual who was nefarious and petty and bitter, and he used to be the most respected kind of office in the land, was the president. Well, now after Watergate, it's like this sliding gates where we no longer hold this person or the institution. We expect them to cheat us. We expect them to lie to us. We expect them to not follow through on promises. This is causing us to erode our faith in government. Well, how about our faith in business? Well, HP is a local business. They used to say about HP, if you had a job at HP, you had a job for life. None of you think about business that way. None of you think that the company you go to work for, when you graduate Jessup, will be the company you retire in. That used to be a common thought. You tried to find a very good company that you could kind of have a long, long career in, and you'd be committed to that company, and that company would be committed to you. Well, that's largely replaced by a commitment to profit margin. So the companies now value profit over people. You know they don't have your back. You know that you are replaceable. You don't trust them, and they, in some ways, they don't trust you. There's this lack of faith in the business institutions. How about what broke our faith in Christian or church institutions? Well, seemingly financial scandals and sexual scandals. Every day there are headlines about our clergy, and each time we have another story about a clergyman who did this or that, a pastor who did this and that, it erodes our ability to trust that institution as being good for us, trustable. So there's a loss of faith in institution. What else causes us to be more privatized? We've become a very highly mobile society. I use this illustration for my students sometime. If I were to say to you, listen, I'm going to secure for you, I have a job for you. You have to get up and move this weekend to Atlanta, and your starting salary is $100,000. I wonder how many of you students would simply say, that sounds great. You would say, this context, my educational, my 4 years, William Jessup, my local community, is not so important to me that I would not go and take that job because of the amount of money it would offer me. Your thinking is that we are very mobile. So, for example, my wife is Dutch. The Dutch culture is not mobile. In fact, typically, you'll be born into a town, you'll be educated in that town, you'll grow up in that town, you'll go to college near that town, you'll get a job in that town, you'll buy a house in that town, you'll die in that town. She and I were married in the church that her family attends, which is a 1,000-year-old building. They have burial plots in the back of that building, of her family, generations of her family, in the back of that church. Well, I would imagine that none of your parents have burial plots because they may have moved so often that there is no place called home that they would want to be buried in. It's one of the reasons why we aren't really burying people anymore. We're cremating them. We take them back to a place the beach or the mountains or Disneyland to scatter their ashes, but no longer a sense of rootedness or place. My wife had that upbringing. For me, I moved 5 times before I was 18. I went to college in Chicago. I went overseas after school. Then I moved from Connecticut to LA to Virginia, back to California. I've probably had 15 or 20 different places that I would call home. When you do not stay around long enough in any one place, what you start doing is not putting down meaningful roots. There's no reason to put down roots in any one place because you're not going to be there long enough to have meaningful roots. You're never there long enough to really develop those kinds of relationships. So if you think about privatization, we are moving into a more privatized state. This is also having great effect on us in terms of the fragmentation of community. Increasingly, the self in American culture is being unhooked from any meaningful connection to the past, community, work, family. In the 80s, there was a group called Focus on the Family, and they coined a term called the nuclear family, and the nuclear family was mom, dad, little Johnny, and little Sally. And it was the first time in history that we started thinking about family as just simply that small family unit. Before this, a family was grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, nephews, cousins, first cousins, second cousins. You knew each other. There were family gatherings, the whole bit. Now the family is just this very small structure, and wherever it goes, you just try to protect this small family because it's unhooked from this larger family community. We now increasingly have something called pseudo-communities. These are communities where there is no real commitment, no real cost, but you find some connection. Of course, I'm talking about Facebook, social media. I'm talking about those places where you just you choose how much involvement, and you basically push off what community used to be. Now, to kind of dig deeper, to drill down deeper, I've placed in this folder as well in the second week of the class a 4-minute video called The Innovation of Loneliness. So I want you to watch it and think deeply about how your world's changing because of the phone, the internet, social media. We'll actually talk about this quite a bit a little later in the semester. But that phone and those pseudo communities are actually an isolating factor, a privatization factor in your life. Now think about how privatization affects something as simple as church. There is a loss of community, a loss of connection. There's more anonymity. Churches are now built so that people feel like they can be anonymous. There's a reason why if you go to a mega church, the room is dark. The walls are painted dark, the curtains are dark, and it's stadium seating. And the idea is it's getting you to have all your attention on what happens on the stage as being the most important thing. And you are largely invited to be a spectator, anonymous. You can be there and nobody knows. And you're beginning to work this stuff out privately in your own heart, right? But you're not engaged as a whole community. They're performing and leading, you are just simply following. Well, this is an example again of how privatization is not only it's happening in the church, it's actually encouraged in the church. For most of us now, what's emphasized in our Christianity is our personal commitment with Jesus, Him being our personal Savior. If you look at some of the intimacy of our worship songs, it literally is, you could boil it down to me and Jesus against the world. I don't need anybody else as long as I have my Jesus. It's the first time in history that faith has been conceived in such ways. Before this, it was a corporate identity, the body of Christ. You were part of a worshiping community. In the liturgy, there's prayers of the people. There's call response. There's creeds. You're hearing the voices of the people. This has all changed in a highly privatized world. Privatization is the second trend of sociology of religions describing American culture to us, and it's affecting even the church.